It's so fun when individuals begin the process of awakening because everything is upside down. Everything is opposite. And it's such a struggle and so much frustration because everything that has helped you survive is now blocking you. You know? But this is also why we need a sense of humor, and we need to practice, because awakening does not make sense to your body and your brain. It simply does not. It goes against every rule of survival. Because now you're to let go of definitions, let go of skill, let go and let life express itself through you. It doesn't make sense, right? So it takes time to activate that consciousness also as biology. And how we do it still, it's humility. And humility is so many different things. And it's such a big topic. You know, we can talk about it endlessly, and we will. Because it's also spiritual to grow into what it is, kind of the softness and being able to receive. And also how to kind of balance one's ego, which is that self-importance. You know, we need the self in order to survive in our environment, because that's how we learn. Because otherwise he says, whatever, I'm just flowing. That will not help you either. So we need all of these levels in ourselves. You know, and sometimes, you know, when people are trying to learn how to work with their ego, I get the question, you know, how do you know that you are not corrupt? How do you know that you are not overtaken by the ego? And my answer is always, I don't assume that. I don't know that. If it were to happen, I would be the last to know. So I always assume that that is happening. I always assume my corruption. Because then I weed. If you rule out the possibility of your own corruption, imbalance, and whatever it is, it will happen. Right? It's like if you have a garden and you decide, well, I've weeded for long enough. Right? Now it's perfect and everything will grow to its full potential. It will be overtaken by weeds. If you assume there are weeds, back to how the brain works, you will find them. And part of being a gardener is you see yourself as, your identity is, a weed finder. Right? You assume that there are weeds. You assume that there's garden work needed to be done. You never think that it's done. You never think of the possibility that it wouldn't be necessary. You do the opposite. So, part of higher consciousness is that you learn to recreate it, because you never assume it. But you learn to do it faster and faster, but you do it from scratch. And you never ever assume that it's not necessary, because the existence, the universe is in transformation. So you always assume there is something more to learn. You always assume that whatever you understood, well, that was 2 seconds ago. You know, it doesn't mean that it's relevant now. You always assume that there is more, that you haven't fully understood it. And that's the fun thing. So you learn to love how to learn. And you always assume that there is more weeding. You always assume that, yeah, if I turn my back on something, that will go corrupt immediately. But you learn how to work with it as an organism, because it's not a big deal. It's just learning about who we are, how existence works, and how to be productive in it. And you include all parts, all possibilities, all variables, right? And you don't pretend. You try to be realistic about absolutely everything. And then back to spiritual practices. This is also why it's how to work with yourself and kind of check yourself and how to promote your growth in every aspect. And never just assume, right? So we learn how to be more thorough, how to check ourselves, how to, it's just like an airplane, right? And a car and a spaceship. Now, in a car, you can, get in the car and drive and just assume, if something happens, you'll just drive to the side, right? An airplane will not take off until they have checked everything. They have people going through everything and checking, because if something were to malfunction, you can't just go to the curb, right? With a spaceship, even more, because out in space, there's no service vehicles around, right? You can't take it to the shop. It's like, so they check, and then they have routines for checking the checkings, and then they check because they have to. The higher you go in consciousness, the more check you need. And it's part of it. Because everything becomes more critical. And you know it. Because you've crashed enough times. Trying to say, oh, that wasn't smart. Because it will happen. And it will make you smarter. Not necessarily, the first time. Because, oh, well, that was just that one time. And then it happens again and again. And you learn that it's smarter to invest in checking, in weeding, in assuming our corruption, assuming that the ego can take over like that. Because that's quicker. Right? So, really having that love and investment in checking ourselves, it becomes just part of how we operate. Right? And just also, if you have a garden, you have to love to weed as well. Because that is a big part of having a garden as watering the flowers or whatever. It's the same thing. And you have to learn to love checking the airplane, or the spaceship or whatever it is, because it's part of it. Right? You have to learn to love when you have children, changing their diapers and feeding them, because it's a big part of being a parent. You can't just skip that part. Right? And this is also how we relate to ourselves. Never assume that it's not necessary. Right? And this is also what keeps us humble. Because when we look for something, we will find it. But the thing is, when we're looking for weeds, and not the good ones, just, looking for weeds. And you will find them also when they're small. Right? You don't wait until they really grow, because you have a routine, right? You have the practices, so you will notice when something is where it's not supposed to be. You will notice these imbalances, and you will be able to work with them and study them and heal them before they take over. But it means that you will have to look. And then it has to be part of your identity. And remember, if we